Greetings and salutations, YouTubers. This is ZillaFan85 back today with another video. This is one that I've actually been wanting to do for a bit of a while now, and I had actually basically alluded to it in one of my previous installments here, that I want to go ahead and essentially rank my top 10 favorite kaiju slash giant monsters. And of course these will all be from film slash cinema, most of which I will be honest, are going to be Toho monsters, but not all of them. So, this is just kind of, giant monsters, kaiju in general. So they're not all going to be from Toho, but I will admit that most of them on this list are. I do certainly as well want to apologize if any monsters that I do have on the list here are not in any of your list for your top 10 favorite kaiju slash giant monsters. But, again, this is obviously just my opinion. This is just my personal top 10 favorite. And of course, it's really, really hard to kind of choose a top 10 because there's so many different monsters that I love, and really hold in high regard. But it's just these ones I've kind of solidly put as my personal top 10. And I do apologize that some of my previous videos have been kind of a bit lengthy, so I don't want this one to be too long. I'm gonna try and keep this as more of a countdown list, and maybe just mention a few things here and there, and just to try and give each kaiju their due just cause, of course. So, without further ado, though, folks, let's go ahead and get this rolling. Number 10, Gamera, and of course, starting off with a non-Toho kaiju, Gamera, of course, from the Daiei Corporation, Daiei Studios. I believe I pronounced that name correctly. I always have some difficulty pronouncing it, but I did try my best to look up what the correct pronunciation was. But Gamera is certainly a monster, a kaiju that I've always loved, since the first time ever seeing him. And actually the first Gamera film I had ever seen was Gamera Guardian of the Universe, believe it or not, and that of course kicked off the Heisei era Gamera films. But that one was really, really enjoyable. It was on Showtime, and I had seen it on the guide on the TV that it was going to be on, and I was in middle school at the time, and I actually kind of funny story here, kind of faked being sick to stay home from school one day because I knew it was going to be on to watch it, and my dad, who was working night shifts at the time, caught on to what I was doing, faking being sick so that I could watch the movie, but he kind of let it slide, and he actually ordered us pizza for lunch, so we ate pizza while we watched Gamera Guardian of the Universe. But hey, that was a fun little day, I try not to do devious things like that too often, but when it comes to me and my giant monster movies, I don't want to say no holds barred, but I do get a little out there. But nonetheless, though, like I said, Gamera's definitely one that I hold in my top 10. Although I'm not as big of a Gamera fan as I am of obviously Godzilla, I still do like all the incarnations of him. I haven't actually seen Gamera the Brave yet, which is the one Millennium era Gamera film, but certainly from what I've seen from the Showa era Gamera films and the Heisei Gamera, I don't really have a preference either way. I know I said with Godzilla I kind of overall preferred the Showa era Godzilla films, and Gamera, the Showa era films, Now the zaniness and silliness that you experienced from the Showa era Godzilla films were basically magnified tenfold for Gamera. But I still liked it anyway. I still thought the movies are really cool, and I just like obviously giant monster movies slash sci-fi movies like that. Even ones that are really silly. But at the same time, I really like the Heisei Gamera films too, and probably say I'm most partial to Gamera Guardian of the Universe just because that was the first Gamera film that I actually saw. But he's got some really cool attacks with his basically his fire breath. They can release that flame breath that he's got, which was kind of altered to a sort of plasma flame in the Heisei era. And then, of course, his kooky ability to be able to fly. When he can essentially retract all his limbs and his head and tail, and fly like a flying. His extremities basically the holes become like these sort of jet fueled rockets that enable him to fly. And when he's got all limbs like that retracted when he flies, they call that his flying saucer mode. And then of course when he's just mainly got his legs and or tail retracted and he uses them to emit the jet propulsion to fly like that, that's more of his jet flying mode. But all those kind of zany move sets that he's got, though, they're really cool. And I've always liked the Gamera roar, and again, Gamera was just a really cool monster. So certainly one that I do have in my top 10 list. So let's go ahead and move to the next one. Number 9, Barragan. And Barragan is a monster that I've definitely always loved. I from his obviously his very first film appearance, vis-a-vis Frankenstein Conquers the World, or Frankenstein versus Barragan, if you will. When he was a true menace in the movie, and even watching the film to this day, he still kind of creeps me out. His presence in the movie with his burrowing underground with that subterranean, feel that his presence, that subterranean being that he is. And then, of course, he suddenly emerges from these mountainsides and stuff, and he terrorizes, these different villages and groups of people and all, and, eats livestock and I guess eats people too. They never really specified for sure in the movie, but I mean, I guess you kind of can put two and two together. Of course, the Frankenstein monster got the blame for all that until Barragan was finally exposed towards the end of the film, and then of course he and Frankenstein battled. A really cool monster. I liked his heat ray in the film, and then of course the other Showa appearance that he made was in Destroy All Monsters, and that was actually the first time that I saw him, because I saw that movie before I saw Frankenstein Conquers the World. And he had a very small part in there, but I had always heard about Barragan. Obviously this was back when I was a kid, getting acclimated to all the Godzilla films, but just from the get-go I always thought he was cool. And then when I actually get to see him in that larger role, when I did see Frankenstein Conquers the World for the first time, I really, really fell in love with him. I like his big floppy ears. I like his horn on his head. His whole look. It's a really cool design. With the bumps on his back, and they really got that look of a subterranean monster down to a T. So, nothing but accolades I have for Barragan. And I love his roar too, and mainly so I'm referring to the Showa era Barragan in both design and roar. Of course, he did appear again in GMK, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Giant Monsters All Out Attack, but he was kind of undersized and just gave off a very underwhelming presence in the film. didn't like his design as much as the Showa design, and definitely didn't like his roar as much as the Showa roar. And I realize his Showa roar is basically the same as Varan and Gorosaurus's roar is similar to them as well, just more of a sort of high pitch to it. But still, nonetheless, though, I still preferred that take of Barragan better. But certainly, though, a monster that I love either way. So anyway, let's continue to move along. Number 8, Gigan. And I know he is definitely one that's always been a sort of fan favorite, and certainly in my top 10. I loved Gigan, with his origins, that he was basically a pawn of the aliens from Nebula Space Hunter M, and made his first film appearance in Godzilla vs. Gigan, which was made in 1972, and I believe that was the first time that I saw him as well, and certainly a monster that I wish that we had seen more of. I know that he reappeared the next movie in Godzilla vs. Megalon, and then we didn't see him again until Godzilla Final Wars, which is a shame that they didn't use him more, because he really is a fantastic monster. Just that whole sort of cyborg-ish kaiju that he is, with that buzzsaw chest and the eye, that laser beam he can fire from his forehead, and from his eye, essentially, and those hook hands, and the giant claw on each of his feet. Just a really, really cool monster, and a cool roar too. So many positive things I could say about Gigan, but again, he's I certainly fall in line with a lot of fans who do have him, very high up on their list. So continuing on, number 7, Mechagodzilla. And of course, as you can see here again, and well, just as with Gigan as well, the pictures that I'm putting up are essentially my favorite versions of each of these kaiju, I should say. So Mechagodzilla, obviously looking at the Showa era Mechagodzilla, which was my personal favorite version of Mechagodzilla. And I like that he was controlled by the evil aliens from the third planet from the black hole. Is kind of a lengthy name to pronounce, but just such a force to be reckoned with. His two Showa appearances, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Terror of Mechagodzilla, and he just had such a great presence in both films. Of course, he very first shows up as the fake Godzilla, and then once that arm piece was ripped off from his battle with Angurius, and then later Godzilla took him on in that city battle scene, and then blasted him with his atomic breath, and which damaged the fake Godzilla's synthetic skin so much that it had to be removed and revealed as Mechagodzilla. Just was a really cool reveal, and just made in for some really, really good fights, gory fights, with him and Godzilla, of course. In the '74 version, you see Godzilla teaming up with King Caesar to take on Mechagodzilla, and then in '75, in Terror of Mechagodzilla, you've got Godzilla on his own against both Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus, who's another monster that I really like a lot. So both films definitely epic. And then, of course, you moved on to the Heisei era, and even though the Heisei version of Mechagodzilla, from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 was my least favorite, personally, of the Mechagodzilla designs, but still put up a really good battle against Godzilla. Still had a lot of weapons in his arsenal. from a different perspective. Obviously, the Showa Mechagodzilla had the revolving, well, had the the finger missiles, and which later became the revolving missiles. That electric cannon that he could emit, the rainbow beam that he could fire from his eyes. A lot of cool moves, and then of course the Heisei version. You've got that is big time weapon, the plasma grenade, I would say, which is the one that could basically reflect Godzilla's heat beam back to him, and magnify the damage output that it would that it would inflict on Godzilla. So you had that. You had the G Crusher attack that he could unleash. You had the beam that he could fire from his mouth. He had all kinds of cool weapons. And then of course you moved on to the Millennium era, where you had Mechagodzilla again reappearing, or Kiryu, if you will, for the third version of Mechagodzilla. And that version I definitely liked as well. Was done. Again, some really cool attacks, including the Absolute Zero Cannon, which I definitely did like. But again, though, just overall, as opposed to a weapon that was used by the humans to try and counter Godzilla, I liked Mechagodzilla better as a villainous robotic kaiju that was controlled by the aliens trying to take over the Earth, and Godzilla had to try and stop him. So, again, but still, either way, though, any way you slice it, Mechagodzilla is a really awesome kaiju. So let's go ahead and continue on. Number 6, Mothra. Yep, and yeah, I realize I don't have Mothra in my top 10. It was really kind of hard to place her. But she is one that I absolutely love. And I know some people aren't crazy about Mothra, while others absolutely love Mothra. And I definitely love Mothra, and it was kind of tough to decide, whether or not I would put her in my top 5, but certainly close to it, obviously, and obviously a top 10 for sure. I was just guaranteed. Mothra is such an amazing kaiju. She's usually portrayed as a sort of heroic, good guy, if you will, kaiju, and of course you've always got not always, but you've very often got the twin fairies, from Infant Island that accompany her, and I always liked the fairies. I thought they were always pretty interesting. I like the Mothra song that they sing. Sometimes I do find myself singing along with them, just not nearly as well, of course. As you can probably hear, my voice is way too deep to sing like they do, but it's still all good. So, but Mothra, she can create basically hurricane winds with when she flaps her wings in her adult imago form. She's got the poison powder that she can emit from her wings as well, which is more of a last resort attack. And then of course she's got the laser beams in the Heisei films that she was able to emit from her antennae as well. So, a lot of cool weapons in her arsenal, and then of course in her larva form, the larva can fire or can emit the silk webs from their mouth, which can, not only cocoon themselves when they're ready to basically pupate into an adult, but they're also able to trap enemies with that as well. So it's always some good stuff that I like. So, and of course her film appearances. Basically, she originally appeared in the original Mothra from 1961, and then of course was in Mothra vs. Godzilla. and then Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, then Terror of Mechagodzilla, or excuse me, Terror. I'm sorry, I was still thinking about Mechagodzilla. After Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, her next appearance was Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. Then Destroy All Monsters. You do get to see her in some stock footage in films after that, but really her next true appearance was in Godzilla vs. Mothra, The Battle for Earth, which of course brought us to the Heisei era of Godzilla films, and then sort of makes like a sort of cameo-ish appearance in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. But then she had her own trilogy of films in the Heisei era, which took place after the Godzilla films had ended, although I guess not really in the same continuity, though, basically. But you had the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, and then, of course, she was back in the Millennium era Godzilla films with GMK, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Then Godzilla Tokyo SOS, which he was in, along with Mechagodzilla, and then of course Godzilla Final Wars. So she's had quite her share of film appearances, especially alongside of Godzilla, and I definitely can't wait to see her appear again in Godzilla 2: King of the Monsters, which is coming out next year. So certainly really excited for that film. So anyways, let's continue on, and we are now reaching the top 5. Number 5, Angurius. And yes, as many other people do love this kaiju, I absolutely love Angurius as well. He was basically the original opponent that Godzilla had fought, vis-a-vis Godzilla Raids Again. So his first film appearance there in 1955. And then he didn't show up again until Destroy All Monsters, but certainly added a lot to that film. He was an awesome addition in Destroy All Monsters, and added a lot to that final battle as well against King Ghidorah. And I love his roar. I love, even though he doesn't really have any sort of beam attacks or anything like that, but he's just got this very fiery, aggressive spirit, and this sort of basically never back down attitude, and he's just a feisty monster, and I really, really love him. And then of course some of his other film appearances that he was in, you had him teaming up with Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Gigan, and then you do get to see him in some stock footage otherwise, but then you didn't see him at all in the Heisei era. That was very disappointing, and then you don't get to see him again essentially until Godzilla Final Wars. So wish that we had seen more of him, because it's such an awesome kaiju, and one that I certainly really love. Obviously my top 5. So but anyways, on to the next kaiju. Number 4, King Ghidorah. Oh yes, Godzilla's, for all intents and purposes, his arch nemesis, his arch rival. King Ghidorah, the three-headed dragon himself, and often referred to as the destroyer of worlds. Now, even though design-wise I kind of prefer, as you see here, his Heisei era design, which I took for the image here, but I think presence-wise, I definitely have to go with his Showa era version, though, because again, that planet destroyer, this beast from outer space, so a space monster with really cool origins, first appeared in 1964's Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and took Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan having to all team up to stop him, and just has always been a true force to be reckoned with. He's got those electro blasts, or anti-gravity beams, if you will, that he can emit from his mouth, and they're basically, from especially too from everything that I've even tried to read up on with with how strong those really are. They're really comparable to Godzilla's atomic breath, and have dealt quite a bit of damage, including to Godzilla as well. You've seen him, especially in the Showa, battles that you've seen them in, when King Ghidorah has used those beams. They've really hurt Godzilla. So, always made for some epic battles anytime that he's appeared. After his original appearance, you got to see him again in Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, which is otherwise known as Invasion of the Astro Monster. Then, of course, as the main kaiju opponent for Godzilla and the others in Destroy All Monsters. And even though, unfortunately for him, he was sorely outmatched, he still put up a really good fight on his own against all those other kaiju that took him on in the film. And then, of course, you get to see him again in Godzilla vs. Gigan. Again, another one that they use stock footage on, but we won't really concentrate on that too much, though. And then really you didn't get to see him again, though, until the Heisei era, where you get to see him in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, of course, and really, really awesome design and all. Like I said, didn't really like the backstory that he was left on Lagos Island and mutated from the three Dorats. It was sort of a weird take on King Ghidorah, but still, though, I still liked him otherwise in the movie. I liked his roar, Always so many good things I could say about King Ghidorah. And then, of course, he does come back in GMK, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. You also did see him, I should backpedal just a bit here, because you did see, well, at least an incarnation of him known as Grand King Ghidorah in Rebirth of Mothra 3. And that was a really fantastic design as well, and was sort of back to that Planet Destroyer route, those roots that he originally had in that film, and that's why out of the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, that would easily be my favorite of those. So, just especially just for King Ghidorah's appearance in there. After GMK, you don't really see him again, because I don't really count Kaiser Ghidorah as King Ghidorah in Godzilla Final Wars. It's sort of a different take, just as you've seen a couple different incarnations, like Des Ghidorah, etc., etc. But again, though, we will get to see him next year in Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters, and I cannot wait. So let's continue on with this list. Number 3, we're at the top 3 here, Rodan, and yes, I love me some Rodan. And again, I liked his 56 incarnation the best as far as design goes. Just such a menace in that film. Rodan, just an awesome monster. Noted very oftentimes as the fastest of all the monsters, because he can fly at speeds easily in excess of Mach 5. I know that's already been documented. Can create sonic booms by his just by his flying overhead. Just a really, really awesome kaiju all around. This sort of prehistoric pteranodon as he was, and just gave off an awesome film presence. I love the original 1956 Rodan. And then, of course, he reappeared again in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and then Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, and then, of course, Destroy All Monsters. I wish he took part a little more than he did in that final battle. He only did a little bit of assistance at the beginning of that battle. But then, otherwise, other than stock footage, you don't really get to see him again in the show era, unfortunately. But he does reappear in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. That version of Rodan, would probably, I don't know, probably be my least favorite. But I did still enjoy seeing him in that film. I like that heat ray that he attained when he became Fire Rodan in the film. It was just great to see him there. And then, of course, we see him again in Godzilla Final Wars, and he makes an awesome appearance in there. With that cool 3-on-1 battle when he teamed up with, when the aliens put him with Angurius and King Caesar to take on Godzilla. Even though they lost pretty sorely, it was still a fun scene nonetheless, and I'm glad that Godzilla didn't kill any of them in that part of the movie. Because I think what it was alluded to is the fact that those three kaiju had previously been Godzilla's allies. That's why he didn't. That's why he didn't kill them, or at least that's what a theory was, as far as that goes. But nonetheless, though, that was cool to see him there. And then, of course, we will get to see him again in Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters, as the other counterpart for Godzilla, or other than King Ghidorah and Mothra, who are also going to appear, as I previously stated. So, really, really looking forward to that film next year. I can't wait to see what Legendary Pictures does for it. So now we are down to the top 2 here, and here we go. Number 2, King Kong. Now again, obviously back to a non-Toho kaiju, and yeah, I do consider King Kong, a giant monster kaiju. He was kind of essentially the OG, if you will. I know, not technically the first giant monster movie. I mean, more so that's credited to films like the silent version of the Lost World, which came out, I believe, in 1927. And I did see that. I didn't see that prior to seeing the original King Kong, but I did see that many, many moons ago, and I always liked that film a lot, the original Lost World. That'd probably be, I'd say, if not then one of my favorite silent films overall. But King Kong is really what put giant monsters on the map, as far as I'm concerned, anyways, and inspired so many other films. Obviously Godzilla took a bit of inspiration from that. You had the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the giant behemoth. So many other giant monster movies that kind of took from King Kong, basically, we could say. But Kong was always this giant gorilla, and kind of felt sad for him in a way, taken off of his island to be put in New York for a show, and then his love for Ann Darrow is what ended up killing him in the end. Obviously that battle on the top of the Empire State Building, or the World Trade Center, if you were following the 76 remake, which I do like that version as well. But the 33 Kong would easily be my favorite. So, and it's one of my favorite films overall as well, certainly in my top 3. But after the original 1933 King Kong, he next appeared in sort of. You had a rendition anyways, because he had Son of Kong, which is still regarded as a King Kong film. And then next, you see him appearing when Toho got the rights. You saw King Kong versus Godzilla, and then, of course, King Kong Escapes. Toho was going to make some other King Kong films as well, but just with problems with retaining the rights and this and that, as well as what they felt might be more of a cash grab for them. Hence, with that whole debacle with Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, which was originally intended as a King Kong film, but nonetheless, though, we still got the 2 Toho films out of the mix, anyways. And then, of course, again, reappearing in the 1976 version of King Kong, and then the sequel to that, which was King Kong Lives. And I like both of those films, actually. I love the 76 version of King Kong. It's definitely up there for the King Kong films for me. And I happen to really like King Kong Lives as well. I know not a lot of people do, but Again, as you've probably heard from a lot of my previous videos, I am very weird. So, but nonetheless, after that, we saw him again in the Peter Jackson remake, the 2005 version of King Kong, and then of course more recently when you saw him in last year's Kong Skull Island. So he's had his share of film appearances as well, and then of course we will get to see Kong reappear again in the upcoming 2020 version of Godzilla vs. Kong. So again, a legendary film and one that I'm excited for easily. So with all that said, we are now at the about to reach the final monster on the list here, the number one, and I'm sure everybody's going to be shocked to know what that one is. But without further ado, number one, Godzilla, of course. The king of the monsters himself is my all-time favorite kaiju, from his very first appearance in Godzilla King of the Monsters, which did actually happen to be the very first Godzilla film that I ever saw. I originally watched it, I believe that it might have been on when I was like 3 years old or something on TV, but I really can't remember stuff from back then. But my first legitimate introduction was on, if anybody remembers, TNT's Monster Vision. They had Godzilla Bash, back in the mid '90s. So I was a little kid back then, and I got to not little, but I was a kid back then anyway. And that was my first real introduction to Godzilla, and of course, again, started with Godzilla King of the Monsters, and the rest is history. I became just a huge absolute Godzilla fanboy, and will be till the day that I die. I am gonna be very proud to admit that, and everything from Godzilla's appearance, which again, obviously, this version here that you see, which is at the 91 Gido Goji, but the 89 Bio Goji is essentially the same anyway, So this is my favorite design of Godzilla, but just from Godzilla's appearance in general to his atomic breath, or even when in the Heisei version when they had other attacks like the nuclear pulse or the red spiral ray, etc., etc., and just his presence in every film, was just always awe-inspiring for me, and just always so incredibly awesome. I could talk about Godzilla all day. You know what I mean? That's just how much I love the big guy. And obviously too have all kinds of Godzilla collectibles. I've got up to date anyways all the Godzilla films on DVD / Blu-ray. I've got a ton of Godzilla figures, just all kinds of stuff. So again, the King of the Monsters is hands down my favorite kaiju ever, always will be. And again, I'll be a fan, till the day that I die, for forever basically. So again, just from the very first time I saw Godzilla, I fell in love, and there's just not like I said, what else can I possibly say? But all hail to the King of the Monsters. So, and obviously too with that, I can't wait for the next couple installments in this MonsterVerse with Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters, and of course the year after that we'll get Godzilla vs. Kong. So can't wait, folks, can't wait. So with that, this does bring us to the end of the list here and the end of this video. Sorry I did kind of carry on a bit longer than I wanted to, but again, I wanted to give each kaiju their due just cause, basically, and give a little bit of, at least a little bit of information as far as why why I do love them so much. I could go on and on about each monster that was on this list, but then we'd be looking at a 10-hour video here or more or whatever. So I want to try to hit points that I wanted to say and not get too carried away, but I had to do some discussion here. At any rate, though, folks, I do, once again, thank you so much for watching. And remember, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, you be good to yourselves, and sayonara.